Hey you guys, it's Peter, and welcome to my channel. Peter likes books, because I do. I love books. That should be my thumbnail, shouldn't it? Hold on a second. All the questions you ever wanted to know about my love of books. So let me tell you what happened. Okay, I do Q&As on my drama channel quite a bit, but over here, I haven't done a Q&A. I mean, it's literally probably been years since I've done a Q&A over here. And so I'm coming up on my, is it my 8-year anniversary? I'm coming up on my 8-year anniversary next month. And so I was thinking about Q&As and whatever. I was like, I should do a Bookish Q&A over on my BookTube channel, because I haven't, in a while. And so I just threw something up on Instagram. I was like, if you guys, I don't remember even what I said. I just said something like, hey, I'm going to do a Bookish Q&A on my BookTube channel. If you guys have any questions, let me know in the comments or put it underneath here and whatever. And so I got, I don't know, probably 60 questions, something like that. And I read some of them, but not all of them. And so I'm going to go through the questions, and I'm kind of excited to see what I got, because I read like, so I commented later that night, and I said, I'm getting a lot of really good questions, because the first couple questions I read were like, oh my God, these are things I haven't been asked in a long time. And it's so fun talking specifically just about books. So I will say this, if you guys would like me to do a follow-up video, a follow-up Q&A, I can do that. You guys know I can take one question and talk about it for 10 or 15 minutes. So if you have any questions that I do not cover today in this Q&A about my specific reading interests and things like that, or anything to do with my love of books or how I feel about books or whatever, please put it in the comment section below, and I can follow this up sometime in the future doing another Bookish Q&A, because this is fun. I'm excited about this. And it's a rainy day outside. It is like a perfect day to like do a Bookish Q&A. Okay, so let's get right into this. So, the first question I have on here, and these are like all, like the last ones are first, so some of these I haven't seen before. Okay, one favorite fiction and nonfiction book. Okay, just one favorite fiction and nonfiction book. So, I'm going to look down here. So, since I'm going to show you some books that I am reading currently, because I think somebody said, are you reading, what are you reading currently? Some of my favorite fiction books that come to mind. I love Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. She's Come Undone by Wally Lamb. To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee is probably my favorite book of life. Dumplin' by Julie Murphy. Let's see, what else? What other books do I love? So I'm looking right down here at Jill McCorkle, and Ferris Beach is probably one of my favorite books of life. I have so many favorite books. I will say, interestingly enough, though, I'm not somebody that rereads books over and over and over. Catcher in the Rye, I used to read every fall, and To Kill a Mockingbird, I've read several times in my life. And actually, the last time I read it, I listened to it on Audible, and it was the narration by Sissy Spacek, who I absolutely love. She's one of my favorite actresses. And so I was really excited to hear her reading of it. I think that I'm so used to, like, even when I read the book today, hearing it in my head of the narration that was in the movie, that Sissy Spacek kind of made it her own, and I just wasn't really used to that, and so I really didn't love it. And I have to say, I did like a video about it afterwards, and I said, I think this will be the last time that I ever read it, and I think it will. I think it will be that was the last time that I'll ever read To Kill a Mockingbird. I'll watch the movie again. Obviously, I love the movie, but I actually, to be honest with you, I like the movie more than I like the book, To Kill a Mockingbird, which is so strange, right? But I'm not a big rereader. Like, those are, and then She's Come Undone, I read a couple years ago when I started Peter's Book Club, before it became a true crime book club. We reread that. I'm not a big rereader. Like, I don't like to reread books. I feel like there's so many books out there that I would love to read new books instead of rereading books over and over and over again. A couple of them, every once in a while I'm like, oh, I want to read that again, but not much. Am I a big rereader? But those are probably the books that have, like, I'm trying to think of a book that would surprise you guys that, like, really, really impacted me. I mean, I've gone through, like, periods in my life where I've loved stuff. Like, I loved James Patterson and read everything he put out for a while. I loved, Dean Koontz for a while and read everything that he put out. That was, like, a phase of my life when I was with my ex, and I can remember on, like, my birthday, he got me, like, a new James Patterson. We were going to Mexico, and he got me, like, a new James Patterson and a new Dean Koontz book, and I just couldn't wait to get through them. I love a lot of, like, Hemingway and Fitzgerald, a lot of that. And I think that's kind of like a little bit of what I'm leaning to this summer. So that's probably a couple fiction books that I really, really love. As far as a nonfiction book that I love, well, anything recovery related. So I'm just going to pull something out. I can never remember what this book is. It's not actually a recovery book. Well, I'll save that for another video, and I'll talk about that. But probably one of my favorite, well, Drinking a Love Story by Carolyn Knopf is probably one of my favorite recovery memoirs. But a more recent recovery memoir that I absolutely love that my friend Tanya Jean introduced me to is called Blackout, Remembering the Things I Drank to Forget. And it was phenomenal, and I absolutely loved it. And that would probably be one of my recommendations. Also, Educated by Tara, I can't remember what her name is, but I loved that book as well. Educated. It was really, really good. I read that during the lockdown. My cousin Caroline recommended that to me. So there's a nonfiction book. Okay. Which true crime serial killer scares you the most? Oh, this is an interesting one. Okay, as far as like reading it and, well, I mean, the one that I'm most interested in is obviously her Baumeister, because, I mean, you know, I have like some personal connection to that and all that kind of stuff. Now that I adjusted my camera, I feel like I need to do a new thumbnail. I'm always about the thumbnail. Okay, and I think that he was pretty scary. I think, I'll be honest with you, like serial killers that are still out there, or killers that are still out there that the crime hasn't been solved or aren't caught, are very, very scary to me. I don't know why I keep on thinking this. Like when you ask the question, I usually go with my immediate gut response with John Wayne Gacy. I don't know why. I will tell you one thing that's interesting. Like my book club partner Mel, when we will read a case, or like a book, she will go in and like watch a lot of the documentaries about it and read other books about it. I'm not that person. Kind of like when we're done with something, I like kind of put it to rest. Unless it's a case I'm really, really personally interested in, I kind of like put it to rest and I'm done with it. And I can give you an example of that. The Chris and Shanann Watts case, the Chris Watts case, like he is so disgusting to me and just pure evil that like when that case was done, like I don't care if I ever watch another thing about that or hear another thing about that. I mean, it just like that is so sad and tragic to me. That's like a good example of that. So I think that's the scariest. Honestly, it's not serial killer, but the reality is when we read about Columbine, that was probably one of the scariest things to me too, and how calculated it was and how planned it was. And I think, well, any victim, obviously, and I think one of the things of our True Crime Book Club is that we really highly focus on the victim stories. But I also think that when the victim is a child, it's like for me, for some reason, it's even sadder to read about. So, but there's a lot, like The Night Stalker. I remember reading the end of that book, and it's the part where they're like getting him on that street and they're all like surrounding him, and it almost was kind of like comical, even though his crimes obviously were not comical. So he wasn't really scary to me. Some of the drawings of like the Zodiac Killer and stuff when I've seen the documentaries don't seem very scary to me, although I'm sure that was completely scary at that time. So I don't know why John Wayne Gacy. I don't know. There's something about John Wayne Gacy. Like I think it was his arrogance and fleeing from the police and things like that. It was so scary to me. Now, a lot of people ask me if I've read certain books. Like somebody said, have you read the Cat in the Stack series, which I think is a cozy mystery series, and I have not read that, but it's on my list. So if you guys ask me about certain series that I've read or whatever that like I've never heard of before, I probably won't mention them in here. Okay, somebody said, do you have an opinion on Colleen Hoover books, worth the hype or overrated? Okay, so I have a little of an issue with Colleen Hoover books. And I have several friends of mine that love Colleen Hoover books and love her and her story of coming from nothing and, you know, writing herself into the American dream and all that kind of stuff. And I know that there are people that love her. Like when we go on vacation, it's so interesting because it's literally like every lounge chair on the beach or by the pool is Colleen Hoover. Actually, this last time in Miami, it was Amy Tintera, which was the book for Peter's Book Club, Look for the Lie. But usually it's Colleen Hoover. Or Colleen Hoover. There's just like tons and tons of people reading Colleen Hoover books. Well, women, mostly, I think. The only book by Colleen Hoover that I've read is Verity, and I read it. I was not blown away. It didn't make me want to read more Colleen Hoover books. In fact, I was going to do a whole video or two talking about, like, I was going to read all the Colleen Hoover books and see what I thought about them, and somebody was like, a couple of people were like, don't waste your time. Like, they're really not that good, which is interesting to me that I didn't get other people that were, because I didn't get anybody that was like, I love Colleen Hoover, like, you have to read her, you know? And I feel like her books books romanticize certain aspects of relationships, and I'm gliding very delicately here. I feel like they romanticize certain elements of relationships that I'm not sure need to be romanticized. That's all I'll say. So yeah, I'm not a big Colleen Hoover fan. Favorite fantasy? Well, I'm not a big fantasy reader, if you want to know the truth. I mean, I don't really love fantasy, but I don't know if this would fit into the fantasy realm. And I actually got this on Audible, and I've never listened to it on Audible. And I rebought the book years ago. But there's a book by Ken Grimwood, and it's called Replay. And it's probably one of my favorite books of life. I read it, like, in my early 20s after I got sober. And it's about a guy, and he's, like, he wakes up, and, like, he dies over and over and over again, and it's him kind of like learning what life is really about. And every time he dies, he comes right back to the same place he was before. And I think he dies like 10 times, and each time he does something completely different. Like there's like the lottery win, kind of like, oh, I know what everything's going to happen, so make the most money. And then there's the romance, and there's all different aspects of what's life really supposed to look like. And that's probably, I would consider that fantasy, and that's probably my favorite book. Fantasy book. But I'm not a big fantasy book. I think the last fantasy book I read was probably Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, and it took me a while to get through. What fantasy town or place from a book would you move to? Oh, good question. 100% Sinful, Louisiana, which is where the Misfortune books by Jana DeLeon take place. And I have not read the newest one that just came out. I'm waiting for it to come out on Audible because I love the narrator, Cassandra Campbell. And the narration is coming out in June. And she has a Facebook group. Jana DeLeon has a Facebook group called The Instigators, which is about everything to do with the Misfortune books. And I love it, and I get everything over there. So anyway, but definitely Sinful, Louisiana, which is where the Misfortune books take place. I would love to live there. Good question. What book took you completely by surprise? Oh, that's a good question. You know what's interesting is I read Behind Her Eyes years ago. I think it's by Sarah Pinborough. And I just recently watched the series that was based on the book, and I did not remember the ending of it at all. I knew something really weird happened at the ending, but I didn't remember. That took me by surprise. And I know when I read it, because I can remember recommending it to people, and I was like, this is such a good book. But the show is so boring, besides the very end of it. And so I was like, that must have been what I remember. I don't remember that from reading the book. But that book took me by surprise. What's another book that took me by surprise? I'm trying to think of like what I've read recently that took me by surprise. Blood in Their Hands by Mandy Matney, which is about the Murdaugh murders, was our true crime book club for, I think, February. I was so burnt out on everything to do with the Murdaugh murders. I could care less to read another thing, watch another thing about the Murdaugh murders. Mel is obsessed with the Murdaugh murders, and she really wanted to read this book because it was by Mandy Matney, and she had listened to her podcast and things like that. So I went into this, and Mel and I kind of like go back and forth with picking books and whatever. And I was like, okay, because we're trying to pick things that are more current. And she's like, well, this is really current, and her book just came out. I think it would be a good read. And I was like, okay, let's read it, because I knew she really wanted to read it. I was so blown away by this book. The fact that more people are not talking about Mandy Matney's Blood on Their Hands is so mesmerizing to me. The book, because the reason why we started a true crime book club really originates from us reading I'll Be Gone in the Dark, One Woman's Obsessive Search for the Golden State Killer by Michelle McNamara, which was about the Golden State Killer. That came out, I don't know however long. That was the first year that I had started Peter's Book Club, which is not the Peter's Book Club of today, but was then turned into True Crime Book Club. Because everybody in the club loved it so much that we were reading this true crime book, and it had just come out. And so it was phenomenal. It was so phenomenal. I think she passed away right after it came out or something like that. And so Mandy Matney's book reminds me so much of that. She personalizes so much of her story, of what was going on. And it's not like just like her telling like what's going on in her life. She parallels it to the trials and to the investigation. It's so interesting. It is a fantastic read. It's probably my easiest 5 out of 5 for this year. So that probably was the book that really surprised me, because I just didn't, I thought it would just be another book about the Murdaugh murders, and I was blown away. I mean, blown away so much that I sent her a message, and I don't usually do that with authors. The last author that I did that with was Vivian Chen, who wrote the Noodle Shop Murders, because I wanted to ask her when the rest of them were coming out on Audible, because I love the narration of it. Okay, are there any genres you just can't get down with? Yeah, okay, so I'm not a big fantasy person, and when I started on BookTube, and it still is on BookTube, but fantasy was so huge, and I just felt like if I'm gonna be on BookTube, like I'm gonna have to read and talk about fantasy, and I just was like, I don't think I can do it, and I really gave it a try. I really did. I'm just really not that interested in it. You know, you know, like, for example, and somebody asked me on here what I think about J.K. Rowling. You know, like, I think I finished book 4 of the Harry Potter series, and I consider those fantasy as well, and they're okay. I mean, I have friends of mine that read those with their kids when they were growing up. I think the Harry Potter books introduced an entire new generation to reading, which I think is fantastic. There's a lot of things that J.K. Rowling has said that I just cannot stand behind. I do not understand why she created this world for people that needed a world to escape to then come out and say such divisive things against especially members of the LGBTQIA plus community, especially trans people who I think in growing up and you know, coming into their own stories really were looking for worlds to escape to, and she provided that for them. To then take that away, I think is, I don't know, it's really sad. But like, I had a really hard time getting through the Harry Potter books. I mean, I only made it through 4, and I really tried. And I have them like on Audible, all of them, by 2 different narrators, and I have all the books. So, and I haven't even finished those. And I don't even know how I feel about finishing them now. I don't know, like, if I want to continue to read them to support her, if that, I mean, I've already bought them, so it's not like I'm going to be supporting her more, but, you know, I don't know how I feel about that. But I have a really hard time with fantasy. I bought, like, the Pierce Brown book, Red Rising or whatever, because so many people said it was really good, and I haven't read it yet. Science fiction, okay, like, it's space stuff, like, I don't really have a hard time with that, but, like, I guess Pierce Brown's more of that. I have, like, well, maybe it's not. Pierce Brown's fantasy. I have a hard time with fantasy. Like, I really struggle with fantasy. So, yeah. Okay. Do you ever give up on reading a book if you're not clicking with it, or is it, I've started it, so I'll finish it? So I used to have, I've done actually whole videos about this way back in the day, about DNFing a book, which is do not finish a book. And I really struggle with DNFing a book. Today, like, if I get into a book and I'm like, and this hasn't happened to me, and I don't know if I'm just blessed to start books that I think I'm going to really like, but I haven't really gotten into a book. Like, okay, my neighbor across the street recommended a cozy mystery to me called A Literal Mess. I started a year ago. It's not the greatest written book in the world, but the story I'm interested in. And so I keep on telling myself I'm going to start it over. I get like 20 pages in, I'm like, I'm going to start it over, I'm going to start it over, I'm going to start it over. So that's kind of what I do. For me, to be honest with you, and this is something I had to do years ago, if I DNF a book, I have to give it away. I physically have to have it out of the house because now Audible is different than that, but I have to have it out of the house because I will try to restart it over and over and over again. Isn't that interesting? Weird, isn't it? All-time favorite book, To Kill a Mockingbird. Does Alex read? Alex reads books that are, okay, so when I met Alex, he liked to read a lot of, like, memoirs. Like, he loved Augustin Burroughs, was probably his favorite, well, was his favorite author, and had read everything by him. He loved Chelsea Handler. He loved the guy that wrote, I can't remember, I have the sort of Beer in Hell or whatever. He would read that, David Sedaris. He read those kinds of books. Now, I'm like looking over his nightstand. He reads books that have something to do with like business marketing for his work. Like, he read that Blank book, and then he was reading, I don't know if that has anything to do with that, but he reads like those kind of books. He's not a TikToker. I mean, he's not a TikToker, but he loves to look at TikToks, is what he loves to do these days. Tanya and Caroline's favorite book. You know, I don't know what that would be without asking him. Caroline would probably say, well, Caroline right now really loves the Kristen Hanna books. She just read her most recent one and she loved it. Okay, so I was going to share this about Caroline. So Caroline listens to Audible exclusively, and this is so funny because I used to do this back in the day with Bonnie Turpin, The Hate You Give by Angie, I can't think of her name. Oh my God, I follow her on Twitter and everything. I love her. I can't think of her name. But The Hate You Give is one of my favorite books too. I can't think of her name. I can see the cover and everything right downstairs. But anyway, I'm like, I cannot remember names recently. But anyway, Bonnie Turpin narrated The Hate You Give. And then she also narrated The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, which I loved. And she's a fantastic narrator. And I love her. And so I would look up, like Cassandra Campbell, who does, so I would look up any books that Bonnie Turpin narrated. And then Cassandra Campbell, that narrates the Misfortune books, like I look up any books that, she just narrated this book that I watched, this book that I read not too long ago, and I listened to it not too long ago, I left. Caroline finds a narrator that she likes, and then she reads all the books that they narrate, because she likes their voice. Tanya likes a book that's at least 1,000 pages. Tanya will read anything, but she loves an epic book. She loves like 1,000-page book that she can really get into. I do not. So that's where we greatly differ. A book trope that you're sick of. I don't know that I'm really sick of any kind of book trope if it's done differently. I'll tell you a book trope that I'm loving right now is podcasts and books, like true crime podcasts. But if it's done differently every time, like I loved it done in Sadie by Courtney Summers. I thought it was fantastically done. I loved it in Conviction by Denise Mina. Oh my God, that was one of my favorite books of life. I love that. And Diana Jewell, I just read the book. What was it called? Or is that her name? Something Jewell. But This Is Not True. It was done really well in that one too. But sometimes it's not done well. And they'll throw in a podcast just to make it current, and it doesn't work. So that would be a trope that I'm loving, but only if it's done well. A trope that... Oh, I'll tell you another book that I was surprised that I liked, was The Housemaid by Freida McFadden. Blown away. Loved both the first and two. Can't wait till the third one comes out. I think she is phenomenal. Phenomenal writer. And I love her. I love any kind of thriller that really, really surprises me. I feel like I read a lot of thrillers and like they kind of start off the same way, like couple living in suburbia in a house, and then I'm kind of done with that trope. If you want to know the truth about that, is that a trope? That's not even a trope. Book that made you cry. I feel like I just cried recently reading a book. What was it? I think the Mandy Matney book made me cry. I did cry during the Mandy Matney book. Oh, shoot, I just went out of the questions. These questions are from so long ago, I don't know how I'm going to find them. Okay. Dun, 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 dun. Okay. The Mandy Matney book made me cry. Fault in Our Stars. I'll never forget reading Fault in Our Stars out on our front porch, and I just sobbed. Like, that last chapter, just sobbed. I love that book so much. Longest book you've ever read. It was probably a Wally Lamb book. It was probably the one... This Much I Know Is True by Wally Lamb. It's probably the longest book I ever read. About the brothers. Favorite character in a book, not Boo Radley. Well, you know what? First of all, I just want to say to you, let me give you a little shout out here if you're Sarah. I really appreciate you recognizing that Boo Radley is actually named after a character in a book, because most people do not know that Boo Radley was named after Boo Radley from To Kill a Mockingbird. And so I greatly appreciate that. And I have to tell you, it's like a real struggle, because I have a list of names for whenever Boo Radley is no longer here, what our next rescue dog will be. And I have a list of like 5 or 6 names, and 3 of them are from To Kill a Mockingbird. I think I have like Dill, Atticus, and Finch on there right now. And so, because I don't want to use Scout. I always want to name a dog Scout, but Tanya got a dog right before I did, and she named it Scout. She no longer has a dog. And, but she named it Scout. And then I said something to her, and then since then I've met like 10 people that have Scout as a dog. And so I'm like, I can't do Scout, right? It's a pretty common dog name. Okay. Oh, wait, what did you say? Favorite character in a book. Favorite character in a book. My favorite character in a book that, like, I smile when I'm, like, listening to or reading, I have to say, I really love Gertie and Ida Bell from the Misfortune series. They just make me so happy when I read them. Who was I reading the other day? I just got I was, like, so excited. I was like, oh, my God, blah, blah, blah. What was it? I was just listening to the other day, and I was like, or was it something I was watching? And I was like, it was a show or something I was watching. Hey, let me look at my list really quick. Oh, Cinder. I read Cinder back in the day. I don't like an Audible. I read Cinder back in the day. I liked Cinder by Marissa Meyer. Is that who it was by? But I couldn't get into all those books. Okay. So, okay. I really liked Mitch from The Firm, and I got real excited when I started The Exchange, but it was just really, really bad. So... Confidence is book 2, and the Denise Mina Conviction was the first one. I love that. And I just went out the questions again. Why do I keep on doing this, Peter? Okay. When did I copy these questions? Let's see. April 4th? I did this so long ago? Okay. Yeah, Gertie and Ida Bell are probably my favorite characters. What book were you a bit embarrassed to add to your Goodreads timeline? I don't know that I ever have actually been embarrassed to add a book to my Goodreads timeline. No, that's not true. I read this book because it was somebody sent it to me, I think. It was called 50 something Crushes. I think I read it like, when did I read it? I think I read it like 3 years ago. 50 Crushes. I wasn't embarrassed. I don't read a lot of like highly erotic stuff. 50 Crushes. Let me put this in here and see when I read it. I'll tell you guys what it was. Why is it not pulling up? Yeah, I've never really been that embarrassed. I've never been embarrassed. That's a funny question. I've never been embarrassed to like add a book to my Goodreads. I mean, my Goodreads is for me. I love Goodreads. Goodreads is my favorite app. But that book, I just was kind of like, I think it's called like 50 First Crushes or something. Somebody sent it to me. Jim, I feel like it was by like Jim 50. Let me look it up. 50 First Crushes or something. I don't even think I finished it, if you want to know the truth. First Crushes. Maybe I did. I don't remember. Is that what it was called? Am I thinking 50 First Dates, the movie? No. It's by like Jim Provenza. He sent it, the author sent it to me. And so I read it for that. God, maybe it was like 4 or 5 years ago. I don't even remember. But that was like the only book, just because it was like, it was all these short stories and they were kind of like highly erotic, and like the cover was highly erotic, and I don't typically read that kind of stuff. But that, I mean, I'm not even embarrassed by, I mean, I'm a 50-year-old man, you know, I'm 51, you know what I mean? Like, if you take issue with that, get over it, I guess. I mean, there's people out there that are reading like hardcore sex, and I mean, Colleen Hoover gets into a little bit of that, right? So, I read those 50 Shades of Grey books. I thought they were boring. If you want to know the truth, that's what I thought about. I'm not getting to any of these questions. I'm like I might be able to do a second one of these. Okay. This time of year, my soul starts longing for autumn. Do you have any cozy book suggestions that feel like fall? Oh my God. The Maddie Day series that takes place, my neighbor introduced me to it across the street. It takes place in southern Indiana. Maddie Day, and the first one's like something grill. It's Maddieday. And I don't know what they're called, but there's like 8 in the series. I'm only on like the 3rd one. They always remind me of fall in Indiana. I would definitely recommend those. There's actually websites out there that you can look up, like favorite cozy mystery series by like season, holiday, whatever. And I look over there sometimes for book suggestions. But yes, and I definitely get like that. Like, it is so, I can hear the rain outside. And I, like, when I just pause, I could hear the rain outside. I'm like, it's such a good coffee and like cozy mystery day. Favorite book with a big twist. Well, that book that I just read for Reese's Book Club in January, First Lie Wins, that was so good. That was so good. I don't know if I'd say it had a huge twist, but it was good. What's the last time you read a book instead of audiobooks? Just curious. Somebody asked. Okay, so I brought all the books that I'm currently reading. So right now I'm listening to on Audible. I only ever listen to one audiobook at a time. This is going to stop in just a second. So I think I'm at like 28 minutes. Hold on. Okay. I typically only ever listen to one audiobook at a time because I just can't keep track of more than that. But I read several books at a time. So right now, these are all the books that I'm reading, physical copy books. And I'm trying to get more back into physical copy reading. I consider... Listen, I read because I enjoy reading. You know, people will come over and they'll be like, audiobooks is not... I used to get so up into that argument, that hype. Audio isn't reading a book. You're retaining information the same way. You know, so many, like, studies have been done that listening to a book on Audible is the same way. There are people that actually can't read a book, so listening to it is the only way they can participate in reading a book. So when you say that, you're taking that away from them. I just want people to know that. And then they're like, yeah, but that's not the case with you. You can choose to read it. I actually retain more information listening to it. I'm more of an audio learner. So for me to listen to a book, and I listen to books fast. I listen to them at 2 times 5 speed, typically. Between 2 and 2 times 5 speed. I can tell you everything from the book. Mel will be so surprised because we'll be talking about a book. She's like, how do you remember that? I'm like, well, I can remember it from when they were talking about this. But I'm trying to, like, get back into more physical copy reading because I love to, like, sit on the front porch, or I want to go to the pool this summer and read. So, these are the books I'm reading. I brought out some short story books, which if you follow my vlog, you probably know this. But I'm reading currently What We Talk About When We Talk About Love by Raymond Carver, because Raymond Carver is one of my favorite short story writers. And I'm reading Jill McCorkle, Crash Diets. And she's one of my favorites. Here she is. Love you, Jill. And I actually had to write to an author in college, and I wrote to her, and she wrote me back. And so I love her. And I've never read this book of short stories, and it's fantastic. It is so good. And then on our trip to Miami, I started this book by Robert Gluck, and it's called About Ed. And it's about this guy that he had a romantic relationship with that he was also friends with that died from AIDS. And it takes place in San Francisco in the 80s and the 90s, and it's really, really good. And I love it so much. And then graphic novels, I just finished Juliet Takes a Breath by Gabby Rivera, and it was based on a book that Gabby Rivera wrote, and the illustration is done by Celia Moscow, and it was fantastic, and I absolutely loved it. I'm thinking about reading the book. Not for kids, I will tell you this. I mean, I think people often think that graphic novels, because they're like cartoons, they think it's for kids. This is not for kids. I think teenage age, I could have read this as a teenager. It's about a girl coming out as a lesbian in the Bronx and from a Latino family that is very anti-gay, and she moves to Portland, Oregon to intern underneath this feminist writer that she's very excited about. Like, she's read her book, and her book really helped her in her coming out process, and it's kind of her journey of coming out. It's fantastically done. And so I just finished that one, and I'm currently reading Fangirl, the Manga 3. I've been reading this forever, you guys. I'm like halfway through it. It's taking me forever to get through. The problem with this is that if I read somewhere dark, I have to have a light, which I just bought these lights because the writing is so small. But if you liked Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell, I love the Fangirl mangas. I love them. I think they're considered mangas, not... If you look online, it says manga, but they're really graphic novels. Oh, the graphic novelization of Fangirl is beautiful, contemplative, and fun reading experience. They're fantastic. They're so good. And then I just started this one, which I look up all these lists of, like, the best graphic novels, because I'm really into graphic novels right now, and I have been for like the last year or two. And this one always comes up, and it's called Check, Please. And it's by Ngozi Akazu. And she wrote a book, actually, and she based this on the book that she wrote. And so you can see it's about a hockey team. It's about a freshman that goes to college, and he's playing hockey, but he was a figure skater. It's kind of like his coming into process, too. And he plays hockey for this Ivy League college that plays like colleges like Yale. This is not for kids either. I will just tell you that right now. I mean, there's not like hardcore sex or anything like that. Well, in this one, in the Juliet Rivera one, there's not pictures, but there are implications. But I don't know yet, because I'm not that far into this one yet, but I will say the language is rather foul. But I have to tell you, I kind of love it. It's hilarious. So those are the graphic novels I'm reading. And then this was the video that I did where I've been wanting to read this book for 20 years, and this was Hutton Hayes, Talbot Street, about the two guys that were friends. I will tell you what's interesting about this is I'm not very far into it, is it really reminds me of Fellow Travelers a lot. It's about two people that work for the government, and they meet like in like the early 70s, and then one guy moves to Indianapolis. So this is a true story, and this is the bar that my husband and I met at, Talbot Street. And well, I met him, like saw him there, and then sent him a message on MySpace. But it's a little embarrassing story, but it's our story. So anyway, and then we went on a date 6 months later, and the rest is history. But anyway, so I've been wanting to read this book for 20 years. The book is really good, but it's very, very wordy. It's like somebody writing a book for a college class, and apparently he's written like 3 or 4 books. I looked him up. He's read like 3 or 4 books. So those are the physical copy books that I am currently reading right now. And people have said to me, they're like, how do you read physical copy books like so many at a time? Okay, so the 2 short story books that I'm reading, like every short story is completely different. Like they don't go together. So I'll just like, if I'm wanting to just read like for a short period of time, I'll pick one of these. These are very different. I mean, if you know Raymond Carver, I mean, he's very dry. And then Jill McCorkle, I mean, they're hilarious and very true tellings about, like, one of them is about a man that leaves his wife and she's on, this is the one called Crash Diet, and she's on this huge diet and he leaves her for another woman, and it's like all these links that she goes to, and like kind of her actions are kind of like borderline crazy, but understandable if you've ever gone through that before. And so I love it. So I just kind of pick one of those up at a time. The graphic novels, I can read like more than one graphic novel at a time because they're like watching TV shows to me. And then these two I am struggling with because they're very similar. So, yeah, that's that. Okay, let me just pick a couple more and then I'll maybe do another one because I'm not getting to all of these. What book genre do you refuse to read, if any? I don't refuse to read any book genre. I mean, if somebody gives me a book and says, like, I love this book and it impacted me, I'll give it a try. I don't promise people anything anymore. Back in the day, people would be like, I want to give you this book. I love this book. And what I will say to people is, you can give it to me. I don't know when I'll give it back to you, if ever, because I don't know when I'll get to reading it. And here's the thing, like, I think all of our reading tastes are completely different, and I think that's respectable. And just because somebody, like, reads a book and has, you know, and loves it doesn't mean that I will. Just because somebody reads a book and gives it 1 star, I don't really go on other people's, you know, recommendations these days. I kind of go on myself because I can get so persuaded. And I think this is one thing, like, with BookTube back in the day, and I don't know about Book Talk, I don't really watch a lot of it, or, you know, Bookstagram and stuff like that, but I used to be swayed. Like, I would sit and I would listen to somebody's review of a video on a book, and they would, like, say, like, oh, they really didn't like it, or whatever, and I would read it, and I would be like, oh my god, like, this is, like, the greatest book. Or they would just, like, swoon over a book. Like, I mean, it was, like, they could not... They loved this book. They couldn't, like, it was the best book in the entire world, right? And I would read it, and I'd be like, I don't understand the connection at all. And reading is such a personal thing. It's just such a personal choice and what you like. I mean, I've liked some really, like, books that, I mean, I think maybe 5 copies were sold, and I absolutely loved them, right? But other people would just never even pick up the book. And then there are other books that other people loved that I can't even get through. So it's such a personal thing. There's not any genre book that I would never read. You know, if it, like, appealed to me and somebody suggested it to me, yeah, I think that would be... I mean, if somebody says to me, like, oh, this book really changed me, or this book, that doesn't really sway me. If somebody says to me, I could not put this book down, like, I literally, like, binge read it in, like, 3 hours, or listened to it, like, in 1 day, that will get me to read a book. That's the clue right there on getting me to read a book. So anyway, okay, I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I guess I have more questions than I thought I did. 6, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and there's 8 on each page. So I have 48 questions left. Leave some questions in the comment section below if you guys want me to do another Q&A, but I think this is a good time to stop, so I'm going to stop here. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.